Week 2 of Mind and Reality. Welcome back. Glad that you're still with us so far. I want to start by giving you a brief recap, since this week we are continuing to think about what I suppose is the main question for the course. Now, if you've got a good question in philosophy, it's important to start with a fact that stands in need of explanation. In our case, the fact that stands in need of explanation is this. Of all of the things that there are in the world, only some of those are things that you can think about. Others are things that you cannot think about. I illustrated this earlier by introducing you to my friend, the puffin. This is an object which, prior to this course, I dare say that you couldn't think about, right? Unless you have some pretty unusual coincidences involving burglary in your history, something like that, that I'm unaware of. You were unable to think about puffin before the start of this course. But of course now you can think about puffin. We can think all kinds of things about puffin. You can tell me in the feedback whether you like puffin or not, and so on. Actually, don't tell me that in the feedback. I probably don't want to know. It's very precious, puffin. Very precious. Now, enough about puffin. You get the point here. There is a fact that stands in need of explanation. Now, this is a fact that seems so straightforward and trivial. That's the kind of thing that only a philosopher could ask, why is that? Why is it true that you can think about these things, but not those things? What's the difference? What makes the difference between the things that you can think about and the things that you can't? Now, that's clearly not going to be a matter just, for example, of the shape or the colour or the size of things. Of course there are very large things, very small things that are difficult to think about, but there isn't going to be a general rule there. It's not going to be some intrinsic property of the objects themselves. It's got to be some relation between you and the object that makes it the case that you can now think about puffin, whereas previously you could not. So I want to reformulate this question, very tiny reformulation that will help us. What sort of relation between a subject and an object has to obtain if the subject is able to think about the object? You're the subject, the object is, for example, puffin. Now, what we've seen so far is that there's a candidate answer to this question. The candidate answer says, it's acquaintance. But Steve, what is acquaintance? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Go back to lecture 2, because we spent a bit of time telling you there that acquaintance is a relation between a subject and an object. It's a form of awareness, and that if you perceive an object or remember an object, you are thereby acquainted with it. Have we fully understand what acquaintance is? No. But we've got to start. We've got some idea. The idea is that there's some relationship between you and an object which involves you being aware of the object. That's acquaintance. That's the relation that explains your ability to think about that object. Now, what we've also seen, continuing my brief recap, is that there's an objection to this view. The objection is that you can think about things that you're not acquainted with. For example, most of us now can think about Julius Caesar, although we're not in any sense capable of perceiving or remembering, most of us, Julius Caesar. Right? Few of us are quite that old. So it looks like the candidate answer must be wrong. But as we saw last week, just here we can revise the candidate answer to save it. We can introduce something called knowledge by description. This is the kind of knowledge you have of an object when you know it only by descriptive properties. So you might, for example, think about the first puffin to visit the moon. Right? That's not a puffin that you're acquainted with, but since you can describe it, you can think about it. So here's our revised answer. The relation that has to obtain between things that you can think about and you is one which involves either you being acquainted with those things or you knowing some description which fits those things. The first puffin on the moon, and so on. Very good. But now comes an even more interesting argument, and this again is just a recap from last week, the argument from massive reduplication. This argument says that acquaintance with something is necessary unless, for all you know, you have never thought about anything at all. So this is an interesting argument for us, this argument from argument from massive reduplication. That's an interesting argument for us, because that argument suggests that although knowledge by description allows you to think about things, there always has to be some acquaintance in the picture. In that sense, acquaintance is more fundamental. Can't do without it. Unless you're prepared to be the kind of skeptic who thinks, look, for all I know, I've never thought about anything at all. Right? Very strange position. Could be true. But I'm not going to consider it. Good. So let me take this and make it a short story. The candidate answer to our question is, it's acquaintance. Now here we have to, of course, acknowledge what we've just done, this complication arising from the ejection, the refinements, and I'm going to abbreviate all that by using the word fundamentally here. Now you have to be very careful using the word fundamentally. I've just done a lot of work to explain what fundamentally means in this particular context. If you use that word without doing the work, no one's going to have any idea. It's a metaphor. Remember that we're not literally building a house, right? I mean, here I am, I'm doing lots of talking, but there are no bricks. There are no bricks. We're not building something. There are no foundations. So when we're talking about fundamentally, we always need to explain what we mean. And in this case, what I mean is all of these revisions about knowledge by description, massive reduplication. Make sense? Great. We've got a short answer to our question. It's acquaintance, fundamentally. 3 words. Not bad. So this is where we are so far. This is my recap. I hope that you follow along with the recap and that nothing I've said has been mysterious or surprising to you. If it is, there are 2 things that you can do. One is you can go back and have a look at lecture 2 and see whether this all starts to make sense. The other thing you can do is just carry on anyway, because as you'll see, the topic for this week can be understood as continuing the investigation that we were carrying out last week. But you can also approach it as a topic of independent interest in its own right. So particularly if you're just joining the course now, if you weren't here last week at all, I would just plough on. I wouldn't worry too much about this stuff for now, although it would be great if you're interested eventually to go back and take a look at lecture 2 from week 1. Thank you very much.